Edward Theodore Gein was born on August 27, 1906 in La Crosse, Wisconsin. Ed was the second of two boys of George Philip Gein and Augusta Wilhelmine Gein. He had an older brother named Henry George Gein, who was 5 years older than the younger Ed. Ed's mother, Augusta, was Lutheran and extremely religious. She would preach to her sons about the innate immoralities of the world. These stern beliefs consisted of what she would term the evils of alcohol and drinking. Augusta also had a strong belief that all women, apart from herself, were naturally promiscuous and instruments of the devil. Ed's mother reserved time every afternoon to read the Bible to her sons. She would preach verses from the Old Testament and the book of Revelations. Augusta also had a well-known hatred for her husband George, who was himself an alcoholic who was unable to keep a job. He had worked at various times as a carpenter, tanner, and insurance salesman. George Gein owned a local grocery shop in La Crosse, but eventually sold the business and left the city with his family to live in isolation on a 155-acre farm in the town of Plainfield, Wisconsin. Augusta took advantage of the farm's isolation by turning away outsiders who could have influenced her sons. The young Ed Gein would only leave the farm to attend school. Other than school, Ed Gein spent most of his time doing chores on the farm for his mother and father. The young Ed Gein was very shy, and his classmates and teachers remembered him as having strange mannerisms, such as seemingly random laughter, as if he was laughing at his own jokes from within his mind. Ed never really had any close friends. His mother, Augusta, would always punish him whenever he tried to make friends. But besides his awkward shyness and having no friends, Ed Gein did fairly well in school. On April 1st of 1940, Ed Gein's father, George Gein, would die of heart failure at the age of 66, caused by his many years of alcoholism. After their father's death, Ed and his oldest brother Henry began doing odd jobs as handymen around town to help cover living expenses for their mother and the Gein farm. And as odd as it sounds, Ed Gein also enjoyed babysitting. With his awkward childlike qualities, he seemed to relate more easily to the children in his town than the adults his age. Ed's brother Henry began dating a divorced mother of two and planned to move in with her. Henry Gein worried about his brother Ed's attachment to their mother and often spoke ill of her around Ed. This would always shock and hurt Ed's feelings. On May 16, 1944, Ed and his brother Henry were burning away marsh vegetation on the Gein property when the fire got out of hand. The local fire department would eventually show up to the property and extinguish the fire. But there was a problem. Henry Gein was nowhere to be found. Ed would later report his brother missing that evening. A search party carrying lanterns and flashlights searched for Henry, whose dead body was found lying face down. Henry had been dead for some time, and it appeared that the cause of death was heart failure, since he had not been burned or injured otherwise. It was later reported that Henry had bruises on his head. The police dismissed the possibility of foul play, and the county coroner listed asphyxiation as the cause of Henry Gein's death. No official investigation was conducted, and an autopsy was never performed. Ed Gein and his mother were now alone. Augusta Gein had a paralyzing stroke shortly after her son Henry's death, and the younger Ed Gein devoted himself to taking care of his mother. Augusta Gein eventually died on December 29th in 1945 at the age of 67. Ed was devastated by his mother's death, saying that he had lost his only friend and one true love, and that he was absolutely alone in the world. Ed Gein cordoned off the areas of the house that his mother had used most frequently, preserving them as something of a shrine. This included the upstairs, downstairs parlor, and the living room. Ed Gein continued to live on the family farm, living off of earnings from odd jobs that he would do around town. But between 1947 and 1952, Ed Gein had found a new hobby. During this time, Ed Gein turned to grave robbing. He made as many as 40 nocturnal visits to 3 local graveyards to exhume recently buried bodies. The first body that Ed dug up was that of his late mother, Augusta Gein, who had died 18 months earlier. He would twist her head off with his own bare hands and bring her head back home to shrink, as he had learned to do from reading taxidermy books. Ed would dig up graves of recently buried middle-aged women he thought resembled his mother and took their bodies home, where he would tan their skins to make experimental human paraphernalia, such as lamps, tables, and bowls. Ed Gein began to create a woman's suit so that he could become his mother, so that he could literally crawl into her skin. Ed Gein denied having sexual contact with the dead bodies he exhumed. He stated that they smelled too bad. Ed Gein soon turned to murder. In 1954, Mary Hogan, a tavern owner in the town, became missing. After his capture, Ed Gein admitted to shooting her. Mary Hogan's head was later found inside of the Geins' farmhouse. Ed Gein's second and last known murder would be on the morning of November 16, 1957. Plainfield hardware store owner Bernice Worden disappeared. A Plainfield resident reported that the hardware store's truck had been driven out from the rear of the building at around 9:30 a.m. Bernice Worden's son, Deputy Sheriff Frank Worden, entered the store around 5 p.m. to find that the store's cash register had been opened and bloodstains were on the floor. Frank Worden told investigators that on the evening before his mother's disappearance, Ed Gein had been in the store and that he was to have returned the next morning for a gallon of antifreeze. A sales slip for a gallon of antifreeze was the last receipt written by Worden on the morning that she disappeared. On the evening of the same day, Ed Gein was arrested at a West Plainfield grocery store, and the Washara County Sheriff's Department headed out to search the Gein farm. When the Washara County Sheriff's Department reached the farm, they discovered Bernice Worden's decapitated body in a shed on Gein's property. She was hung upside down by her legs with a crossbar at her ankles and ropes at her wrists. The torso was dressed out like a deer. She had been shot with a .22 caliber rifle. Inside the Gein farmhouse, the Washara County Sheriff's Department found what could only be described as a house of horror. Amongst the disturbing things found inside were whole human bones and fragments, a wastebasket made of human skin covering several chair seats, skulls on Ed Gein's bedposts, female skulls, some with the tops sawn off, bowls made of human skulls, a corset made from a female torso skinned from the shoulders to the waist, leggings made from human leg skin, masks made from the skin of female heads, Mary Hogan's face mask in a paper bag, Mary Hogan's skull in a box, Bernice Worden's entire head in a burlap sack, Bernice Worden's heart in a plastic bag in front of Gein's potbelly stove, a belt made from female human nipples, 4 noses, a pair of lips on a window shade drawstring, a lampshade made from the skin of a human face, and fingernails from female fingers. Ed Gein admitted to killing the 2 women and pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. In late 1957, Ed Gein was deemed unfit for trial and was subsequently confined to various psychiatric institutions. In 1968, however, it was determined that he could participate in his own defense. Edward Gein was finally put on trial. Edward Gein was found guilty, but deemed insane at the time of the crimes. He returned to the mental hospital. On July 26, 1984, Edward Gein died at the age of 77 years old at the Mendota Mental Health Institute due to respiratory failure secondary to lung cancer. Ed Gein's bizarre story would go on to inspire numerous books and movies. The most notable would be Alfred Hitchcock's 1960 film Psycho, which was based on Robert Bloch's 1959 novel. Tobe Hooper's 1974 horror classic, The Texas ChainSaw Massacre, would also be based on Ed Gein's story, as well as the 1991 film, The Silence of the Lambs. The crimes of Ed Gein, the Butcher of Plainfield, the Plainfield Ghoul, will always live in infamy.